Seattle General in San Antonio smells like industrial antiseptic and burnt coffee at 0600 hours. Katie Morrison pushes a medication cart down the oncology wing, her scrubs perfectly pressed, her badge clipped at the exact angle that keeps the security cameras from catching her face during the overlap shifts. 8 months. She's been here 8 months, and not a single person has noticed the way her eyes track every exit, every camera angle, every medication inventory discrepancy that shouldn't exist. The cartwheels squeak against linoleum. She's memorized the sound. Memorized the rhythm of the floor, how many steps from the north stairwell to the medication dispensary, how long the security cameras take to cycle through their blind spots, which residents leave their credentials in the unsecured pocket of their white coats during lunch breaks. Pain is information. Information is survival. At the corner of the hallway, Dr. Mercer rounds the turn with his entourage, 3 residents trailing behind like pilot fish, their voices dropping the moment they see her coming. He doesn't look at her directly. Not yet. Dr. Mercer is the kind of man who scans a room and doesn't truly see the staff that keeps it running. She's inventory to him. Less than inventory. An obstacle between him and his teaching moment. "Excuse me," she says quietly, pulling the cart closer to the wall to give them passage. Her voice is soft. Deferential. The voice of someone who knows her place. Dr. Mercer sweeps past without acknowledgement. One of the residents, a woman with sharp eyes and a temporary badge still clipped to her lanyard, glances back at Katie for a fraction of a second longer than the others. Katie has already looked away. She's already moved on. She's already forgotten the interaction existed, or at least that's what her face communicates. But her hands. Her hands remember everything. The scar tissue across her knuckles is thin now, nearly invisible unless the light hits them right. 5 years of rehabilitation at Walter Reed. 5 years of relearning how to feel a pulse without the tremor that used to come with peripheral nerve damage. She'd been a trauma surgeon before she was a nurse. Before her son was born. Before an IED near Sanjin Valley taught her that some assignments don't let you keep both a career and a family breathing. She rounds the corner toward room 847 and catches her breath before she enters. The colonel is awake today. That's new. Most days he stares at the ceiling with the 1,000-yard gaze of someone whose body has already started saying goodbye to his mind. But today he's shifted slightly in bed, his oxygen mask resting on his chest, his eyes tracking the small television mounted in the corner where a game show plays on mute. His jacket hangs in the closet, and she's seen it every single day for 8 months. The fabric is worn. The Air Force blue has faded to something closer to gray. But the unit patch sewn inside the lining, stitched there by someone who loved him, someone who wanted him to carry home with him even when home was 7,000 miles away, that patch is why she's here. 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. Her son's unit. Tikrit. The same deployment that took his father. She doesn't let her face change. She's been trained better than that. She's been trained to hide what she knows, to separate what she feels from what she does. The mask she wears isn't a lie, it's operational discipline. It's the thing that keeps her son alive, because the supply diversion ring she's been documenting for the past 8 months is moving medical equipment that's supposed to go to forward operating bases, and if she breaks her cover now, if she lets anyone know why she's really here, the investigation stops. The criminals scatter. The next nurse to arrive, the one without her training, without her ability to maintain composure, might not survive the complications. "Morning, sir," she says, checking his full line. The saline drip is clear. The port is clean. She's checked it 17 times in as many hours, a frequency that would look like obsessive behavior to anyone who didn't understand that she's timing the medication dispersions against the shift changes, cross-referencing the missing inventory against patient charts, watching for the moment when someone reaches into the supply closet and takes what doesn't belong to them. "Morning, nurse," the colonel says. His voice is gravel. His eyes don't quite focus on her, but there's something in his bearing, something that hasn't completely surrendered to the disease eating him from inside. 37 years in the Air Force. That kind of service writes itself into the spine. She doesn't tell him. She doesn't say, "I knew your commanding officer's wife before she passed." She doesn't say, "Your battalion is protecting my son right now." She doesn't say anything except, "Your vitals look stable today, sir." Pain level. Manageable, he says. That's military for excruciating. She notes it in his chart anyway, the truth, not the stoic answer. That's part of her job. That's always been part of her job. Document everything. Trust nothing. Keep moving. The intercom crackles above her head. Code Blue, Trauma Bay 4. Somewhere in the hospital, someone is dying, and every available physician is about to run toward the emergency. Every attending. Every resident. Every cardiologist within earshot of the overhead system. She knows this because she's mapped the response patterns. She's timed the average response. 3 minutes 47 seconds from overhead page to first physician arrival in Trauma Bay 4. She finishes checking the colonel's medications and moves toward the nursing station, where Judith is updating charts with the kind of focused intensity that suggests she's already mentally running through the Trauma Bay for logistics. "You heading down?" Katie asks. It's a standard question. The kind of thing a normal nurse would ask another normal nurse during a code. "They've got enough staff," Judith says. She's been a nurse at Seattle General for 19 years. She knows the rhythm better than anyone. Besides, oncology census is high. Someone needs to watch the floor. Katie nods and settles into her shift, her eyes tracking the medication dispensary from her position at the station. She can see the lock. She can see who approaches it. She can see the timestamp on every access. This is what 8 months looks like. This is what a covert operation looks like when it's done correctly. No drama. No sudden movements. Just a civilian nurse doing her job, keeping her head down, documenting everything in a private notebook she keeps hidden beneath a false bottom in her locker, beneath the hospital scrubs, beneath the life she's constructed as cover. But that wasn't the worst part of what she was about to discover. 2 hours later, Dr. Mercer returns from the Trauma Bay 4 code with blood on his cuff and something in his expression that looks like satisfaction. He rounds the corner near the medication dispensary and stops. His eyes scan the area. Katie is already looking away, already pretending to focus on the chart in front of her, but she caught the moment his gaze landed on her and then passed through her, dismissing her, the way water dismisses a stone. He doesn't know. He has no idea who he's standing next to. He just sees a civilian nurse. A woman who works the oncology floor. Someone whose name he doesn't know and whose credentials he'll never verify. Someone beneath his notice. What he doesn't see is the hands that once held bleeding Marines. What he doesn't see is the clearance level tattooed on her records in languages he doesn't speak. What he doesn't see is the colonel in room 847, the dying man with the faded unit patch, whose commanding officer is currently stationed in Tikrit with a teenager who needs his mother to stay focused, to maintain her cover, to keep breathing until the operation is finished. He walks past her without speaking, and Katie has already returned to her work. The shift continues. The patients stabilize. The medication inventory gets logged and cross-checked and filed. And in room 847, the colonel sleeps the sleep of the heavily medicated, his jacket hanging in the closet, its secret still safe, its meaning still hidden from everyone except the woman who's been counting the days until she can finally go home. 8 months down. Unknown time remaining. Pain is information. Information is survival. And Katie Morrison, civilian nurse, former trauma surgeon, active duty captain in the United States Air Force, continues her shift as if she were nothing more than what everyone assumed her to be. Tuesday morning at Seattle General breaks gray and surgical clean. The coffee in the break room smells like burnt filter and yesterday's ambition. Katie stands at the nurse's station, fingers moving across the keyboard with the precision of someone who has charted under candlelight in a combat tent, who knows that documentation saves lives or condemns them. The morning admission notes are exact. Vitals. Observations. The kind of charting that survives scrutiny. Dr. Mercer rounds with his entourage at 0730 hours precisely, a calculated entrance. Medical students trail him like pilot fish behind a shark. Residents orbit in careful formation, notebooks open, pens poised, their eyes still bright with the belief that medicine is about learning rather than hierarchy. Katie knows better. She has seen hierarchies built on triage, where the skilled save and the arrogant watch people die. He stops the entire procession directly in front of the nurse's station. Deliberate. Staged. His voice carries the practiced volume of someone accustomed to being heard in amphitheaters. Let's discuss what happens when documentation standards slip. He doesn't pause. He doesn't need to. He points at Katie. Not toward her. At her. Like a prosecutor identifying the defendant. Nurse Morrison here. Should we trust a nurse who can't even document properly? Yesterday I found 3 charting errors in her notes. The fluorescent lights hum overhead. A monitor beeps 3 rooms down. One of the medical students shifts her weight, uncomfortable. Katie knows there were no errors. She has reviewed her own documentation with the same ruthlessness she has applied to everything in her life, as if someone's survival depends on it. Because someone's always survival depends on it. She turns slowly from the computer. The chair rolls back with a sound like wheels on tile. Her eyes meet Dr. Mercer's with the temperature of a high-altitude dawn. Cold. Clear. Unbroken. She says nothing. The silence extends. It stretches like a taut rope. He continues his performance anyway, because men like him do not require permission to speak, and they do not recognize the difference between an audience and a courtroom. When he finishes, when his words have finally scattered into the stale hospital air, Katie stands. The movement is not angry. It is not defensive. It is precise, the way a soldier stands when the national anthem plays, present, accounted for, unflinching. She maintains eye contact. Her voice, when it comes, sounds like winter speaking. Like ice with memory. Strange how the patients you mock me in front of keep requesting me by name, Dr. Mercer. Then she turns and walks away. Not quickly. Not slow. With the certainty of someone who has already won a battle the opponent didn't know they were fighting. Behind her, his face reddens like a thermometer climbing in summer heat. The medical students exchange glances. One of them writes something in her notebook. Whether it is about Katie or about him, Katie does not know. She does not look back to find out. Thursday arrives with that particular hospital exhaustion that settles in your bones by midweek. Katie is at the vending machine on the 4th floor when Dr. Mercer appears with 4 residents clustered around him like students at a lecture. He has positioned himself between her and the exit, though she knows this is not accidental. Nothing he does is accidental. It is all choreography. All performance. Some people peaked in community college and spend the rest of their lives pretending expertise they don't have. His voice is loud enough for the hallway to hear. Loud enough for the patients in nearby rooms to hear. Loud enough for it to matter. The residents laugh on cue, the sound hollow and practiced. Then they take jobs where nobody asks questions, where they think they can play doctor. Katie selects her coffee. The machine whirs. A paper cup drops into the slot, and hot liquid begins to fill it. The sound of it filling, that gentle percussion of heat and water and the specific desperation of caffeine in a hospital hallway, is louder than his voice. She watches the cup fill. She does not flinch. She does not flush. She does not defend. The trembling that someone less trained might feel is converted, by 8 months of operational discipline, into absolute stillness. She takes the cup. The handle is warm. She looks at him then, that same cold, flat stare that has learned to live in her eyes, the one that comes from watching people die despite everything you do, and then she walks toward him. Not around him. Toward him. And he steps aside because something in her posture, the absence of hesitation, the presence of certainty, tells him that she will not deviate. The residents notice. One of them stops laughing. Katie passes without speaking, without acknowledgement, without the performance he was clearly expecting. She simply walks, cup in hand, back toward the oncology ward. That evening, she hears him in the physician's lounge telling another attending that she's mentally unstable, that her credentials might be fabricated, that she's the kind of person who gets people killed by overreaching. By Friday, she notices the way other doctors' eyes slide past her in the hallway. It is the avoidance of someone afraid of contamination, as if her defiance has made her contagious. Friday afternoon, the medication room. Control temperature, alphabetized bottles, the smell of plastic and antiseptic sharp enough to cut. Katie is restocking the benzodiazepine drawer when Dr. Mercer enters and closes the door behind him. Not locks it. Just closes it. The gesture itself is a threat, a boundary that narrows the world to just this space, just this moment, just the two of them. If you ever overstep your scope again, I'll have security escort you out of this hospital in handcuffs. Do we understand each other? His voice is quiet now. Quieter is worse. Quiet is when the threats become real. Quiet is when hierarchy becomes the only language available. Katie's jaw tightens. She can feel the muscle working at her temple. But her voice stays level. Stays professional. Stays civilian nurse. Perfectly clear, doctor. What she does not say is that his name appears 17 times in the supply diversion record she has been compiling for 8 months. What she does not say is that she has documented every instance, dates, times, amounts, the signatures on forms that do not match the supply logs. What she does not say is that somewhere in a Pentagon database, there are photographs of him meeting with someone from a pharmaceutical distribution company that does not legally exist. What she does not say is that her son is breathing because of soldiers who stand against corruption, and that Dr. Mercer's corruption is exactly the kind that kills soldiers by denying them proper equipment, proper medication, proper care. What she does not say would matter more than anything she could say. Over the following weeks, the isolation deepens. The other physicians begin assigning patients differently when they see her name on the roster. They find reasons to recuse themselves from consultations. In the break room, conversations stop when she enters. The nursing director approaches her on a Wednesday with an expression of concerned confusion. I've had some physicians express concerns about your clinical judgment, the director says carefully. And about your background. Have you ever worked anywhere else besides community college? Katie answers with the prepared response, the civilian identity that has been waiting in the wings for exactly this moment. Seattle Community College. 3 years there. References available. All of it verifiable and none of it true. All of it impossible to disprove. I understand, Katie says. I'll be more careful. That night, she sits in her apartment, small, rental, identical to 100 other temporary stations she has occupied over 20 years of service, and she allows herself 2 minutes of anger. 2 minutes to feel the weight of his campaign, the calculated destruction of a reputation he never bothered to actually know. She sits on the edge of the bed where her late husband's photograph still sits in dress blues, taken 23 years ago, 2 months before the accident that made her a widow at 28. The colonel in room 847 had commanded that same unit. Had saluted at that same funeral. Now he is dying on the oncology floor, and Dr. Mercer is determined to ensure that nobody trusts the only person on this hospital staff who has the training to save him. That night shift is coming. The night when most of the surgical staff will be downtown at a conference dinner, when 12 attending physicians will be scattered across Seattle General's departments, when the colonel's lung will collapse like a structure built on sand, when pressure will accumulate in his chest cavity like time accumulating in a life spent waiting. Katie finishes her coffee. The cup is cold now. She disposes of it and begins the next day's preparations. Supplies checked. Routes memorized. Protocols reviewed. Everything ready. Everything waiting. It isn't long. The Tuesday night shift begins at 1900 hours and Seattle General's surgical floors are running skeletal. Most of the attending physicians are downtown at the annual medical conference dinner, the one where they talk about excellence while eating $200 steaks. Katie Morrison clocks in on the oncology wing with 3 other nurses, the patient load distributed across a footprint designed for 6. She doesn't complain. She counts instead. 47 patients. For nurses. Room 847 is Colonel Air Force lying in the corner bed, the one with the faded unit patch sewn inside his jacket lining on the chair beside him, the same patch Katie's dead husband wore in Tikrit, the same unit her deployed son currently serves under this man's command. The evening passes with the mechanical rhythm of a floor running on skeleton crew. Vitals taken. Medications dispensed. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead like insects. By 21:30 hours, Katie notices the change in room 847. Small. Subtle. The kind of change that doesn't trigger alarms because the body hasn't reached the threshold yet, but Katie has spent 16 years reading the landscape between normal and crisis, and she recognizes the tilt immediately. The Colonel's oxygen saturation is trending downward. 88. 86. 84. His breathing has shifted from diaphragmatic to chest wall effort. Each inhale requires visible muscle engagement. The monitor shows a heart rate climbing, blood pressure beginning to drift. The patterns form a picture Katie's hands have seen before, on deployment in Tikrit, in forward operating bases where there was no attending physician to call, where recognition and intervention were the only distance between life and catastrophic failure. At 2,147 hours, Katie's assessment crystallizes into certainty. Tension pneumothorax developing. The Colonel's lungs collapsing incrementally, air trapping in the pleural space with nowhere to escape, pressure building against his heart with every breath until eventually there would be no next breath at all. She palpates his chest. Decreased breath sounds on the right side. Tracheal deviation beginning. The signs write themselves in medical language anyone trained would read, but trained people need to be present first. Katie moves to the call button. I need an attending physician in room 847. Possible pneumothorax. Stat. Her voice remains level. Professional. She doesn't sound like a woman watching a dying man and counting the minutes remaining. She sounds like a nurse requesting routine consultation. The overhead intercom crackles with hospital static. No response. She waits 15 seconds. The Colonel's oxygen saturation drops to 82. She calls again. Room 847. Attending physician required. Patient decompensating. The first refusal comes from Dr. Raymond, who has never treated this patient and doesn't intend to start now. Page cardiology, he says through the speaker system, his voice thin and annoyed at the interruption to his evening. That's not my floor. Katie doesn't argue. She moves toward the crash cart, her movements precise, economical. Pain is information. This moment is data. The second physician doesn't even respond to the page. Katie calls overhead again. I need backup in 847. Tension pneumothorax suspected. Immediate response. This time Dr. Chen's voice crackles through, I'm unavailable. Try the ER attending. The ER attending is already running 3 traumas. Katie already knows. She's been tracking the hospital status all evening, the kind of tracking that comes naturally to someone whose entire career has been about knowing which doors are locked, which corridors are empty, which authority figures are positioned where. The third physician claims scope restriction. The fourth says he's with a family in the family consultation room. The fifth is scrubbing in for an emergency case. The sixth doesn't answer the page. The seventh hangs up mid-conversation. Katie counts them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The Colonel's heart rate climbs higher. 98. 104. 112. His breathing becomes rapid, shallow, desperate, the sound of a body running out of oxygen, the sound Katie has trained herself to recognize and respond to in the 3-second window before panic takes over the clinical thinking. 8. 9. 10. 11. The nurses on the floor are experienced. They know what they're seeing. But they also know what happened to Katie in the vending machine hallway, what Mercer did to her in front of medical students during grand rounds, what he promised would happen if she overstepped her scope. So they watch. And they do their jobs. But they don't intervene beyond their assigned nursing duties. The system has already taught them the price of helping Captain Katie Morrison when Dr. Mercer has decided she's the problem. 12. The 12th refusal comes as Katie is pulling on fresh gloves. Dr. Hollis, the youngest attending on rotation, hesitates for exactly 2 seconds before saying, "I'm not comfortable with this patient's history. Someone else should take it." There is no one else. There is only Katie standing in room 847 with a man whose oxygen saturation has dropped to 74%, whose pulse is threading now, whose body is entering the early stages of hypoxic shock, and exactly 90 seconds before his heart decides the effort isn't worth continuing. Dr. Mercer appears in the doorway at 2153 hours, his white coat still pressed sharp, his posture radiating the particular confidence of a man who has never experienced a consequence he couldn't escape. 2 residents flank him like attendants. He doesn't enter the room. He positions himself in the threshold, arms crossed, watching with the expression of someone waiting for a specific kind of failure. "Perhaps you should wait for a qualified physician, Nurse Morrison," he says, and the satisfaction in his voice is a physical thing, something Katie can almost taste. "I would hate to see you overstep your scope again." The colonel's monitor shows bradycardia beginning. The pressure in his chest cavity is compressing his heart now, reducing cardiac output, and if it continues for another 60 seconds, the electrical system will simply stop. Katie's hands are already moving. She pulls the thoracotomy tray closer. The plastic gloves snap against her wrists, the sound like gunshots in the sudden silence of the room. "If you touch that patient with anything beyond basic nursing interventions," Mercer continues, stepping slightly closer, his voice taking on the tone of someone making a legal record, "I will personally ensure you never work in healthcare again. You have my word on that." Katie feels the moment like a weight shifting. The point where every decision made in the last 8 months, every humiliation accepted, every insult swallowed, every moment of operational discipline, converges into a single choice. She thinks of her son in Tikrit, deployed with this colonel's unit. She thinks of the encrypted messages from her handlers, the classified operation running underneath the civilian nurse cover. She thinks of the unit patch in the colonel's jacket, identical to the one her dead husband wore, and the promise made in a secure Pentagon video call, "If anything happens to the colonel, you're the only one who gets him out alive." Dr. Mercer takes another step into the room. Behind him, the residents shift uncomfortably, sensing something they can't quite name, the way the air pressure changes when apex predators recognize they're standing in water above their heads. Katie's fingers find the second intercostal space, the midclavicular line, the anatomical landmarks burned into muscle memory from 16 years of trauma protocols. The colonel's oxygen saturation is 68 now. His lips are taking on a gray tone. His eyes are wide, drowning in air that should be reaching his lungs but isn't. "Then you better start making calls, Doctor," Katie says, her voice dropping an octave, the military cadence surfacing beneath the civilian accent like a submarine rising to periscope depth. "Because I'm the only one coming." She doesn't wait for his response. Her hands move on their own, the needle already in motion, the 14-gauge angiocath from the thoracotomy tray, the motion practiced 10,000 times in training scenarios and twice more on deployment when there was no physician at all and a young Marine needed his lung re-expanded or his next breath would be his last. Mercer's face reddens. He steps forward as if to physically stop her. But something in Katie's posture, the way her shoulders have squared, the way her stance has widened into something he's never seen before, makes him hesitate. His mouth opens. Closes. The residents watch, sensing the tectonic shift happening in real time, the moment when the hierarchy of the room is being rewritten by muscle memory and classified operations and a captain who has already decided that some rules are meant to be broken. The needle is already poised. The colonel's heart rate drops lower. Everything else is waiting. The colonel's heart rate dropped to 52. Then 48. The monitor's rhythm became erratic, not quite a pattern anymore, more like a failing instrument playing its last notes. Katie moved. No hesitation. No debate with herself about scope of practice or licensing boards or 8 months of operational discipline that could evaporate in 90 seconds. 90 seconds. That's how long she had before his heart stopped completely. The pleural space was collapsing. She could hear it in the quality of his breathing, wet, shallow, the sound of a man drowning while still alive. His oxygen saturation had plummeted to 68%. The ventilator was pushing air into lungs that couldn't expand because the pressure in his chest cavity was crushing them flat like a fist closing around a balloon. She'd been trained for this. Not as a nurse. As a field medic attached to 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines during her first deployment to Helmand Province in 2015. She'd performed needle decompression on a 19-year-old Lance Corporal named Torres while rounds were still coming downrange, the hiss of escaping air matching the hiss of bullets passing overhead. That was 7 years ago. 7 years of this skill living dormant in her hands, waiting for a moment that was never supposed to come during a Tuesday night shift in San Antonio. But here it was. Katie's hands moved on their own. Muscle memory didn't ask permission. She grabbed a 14-gauge angiocath needle from the crash cart, her fingers finding the syringe attached to it with the precision of someone who'd assembled this exact kit in the dark. The second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, the anatomy hadn't changed. Neither had she, despite the scrubs and the civilian paperwork and 8 months of standing silent while Dr. Mercer invented stories about her competence. She prepped the skin with an alcohol wipe. No time for full sterile technique. Field conditions. The colonel's lips were turning grey. His nail beds looked like old concrete. 1 breath. 2. Then nothing but the machine breathing for him while his own body suffocated from the inside. The needle went through skin. Through muscle. Through the fascia of the chest wall. Katie felt the resistance change, that specific give of tissue parting. She was moving at the speed of training, the speed of muscle memory that had never forgotten what it was built for. The syringe was attached to the needle. Her thumb depressed the plunger to feel for air rather than blood. And then, the hiss. It wasn't loud. It was louder than that. It was the sound of compressed atmosphere escaping from a sealed space, the sound of pressure releasing all at once, the sound of survival. Air rushed out of the pleural space in a rush that seemed almost alive, decades of training condensed into that single, unmistakable sound. The colonel's body jerked. His chest expanded. His lungs, finally free from compression, finally able to do what lungs were supposed to do. Katie secured the catheter with one hand while watching the monitor with the other. The oxygen saturation was already climbing. 68. 71. 76. The heart rate stabilized. His color began returning, not the gray of someone drowning, but actual pink in his lips, actual life in his face. His chest was moving now, real breathing, air moving into lungs that could finally accept it. The colonel's eyes opened for just a moment, and he gasped, a real, conscious gasp of someone returning to the world. 83% oxygen saturation. Sinus rhythm on the monitor. He was alive. He was breathing. He was awake. That's when the door to room 847 swung open. Dr. Mercer stood in the doorway, his mouth open, his face registering what his brain was still processing. He'd been in the ICU attending to another patient. He'd heard the overhead page about the colonel, and he'd walked toward the commotion like a predator drawn by the scent of blood. But it wasn't the patient's blood he wanted. His eyes locked on Katie. On the needle in her hand. On the catheter taped to the colonel's chest. On the monitor showing a stable heart rate. On the oxygen saturation climbing past 90. What did you just do? His voice was quiet, which made it worse. Quiet voices could carry across entire rooms. Quiet voices could end careers. What did you just do? Katie's hands were steady. Her breathing was steady. Every part of her that had just performed field medicine under pressure that would make most people's hands shake, was now quiet. The voice she used was the voice she'd been using for 8 months, deferential, measured, small. The colonel had a tension pneumothorax. The needle. You performed a procedure. Mercer wasn't questioning. He was cataloging. His phone was already in his hand. You performed a medical procedure without a physician present. Without authorization. Without a license to perform medicine. He was dialing as he spoke, his eyes never leaving her face. That's practicing medicine without a license, Morrison. That's a felony. The room seemed to contract. Katie could feel the weight of it, not the weight of what she'd just done, but the weight of what she'd just revealed. Her hands. Her knowledge. The way she'd moved with the certainty of someone who'd done this before. The way she'd known exactly where the needle needed to go, how much pressure to apply, what to listen for. She'd blown 8 months of cover in 90 seconds. The colonel's hand moved. His eyes were opening fully now, consciousness returning like a light switch being thrown. His breathing was steady. His color was normal. He was alive because Katie had broken protocol. He was alive because her cover identity as a civilian nurse had just dissolved like morning fog. Dr. Mercer was speaking into his phone, his voice now sharp and rapid, the voice of someone who'd just been handed exactly what he needed. Yes, I need the chief of staff immediately. I just witnessed a nurse perform a procedure completely outside her scope of practice. A procedure that constitutes practicing medicine without a license. I have witnesses. I have the patient monitor data. I need this documented immediately for the board and for legal. He paused, listening, then continued. No, I won't wait until morning. This is a patient safety issue. She could have killed him. She still might have killed him if proper protocols aren't followed now. Katie looked down at her hands. The needle was still in her grip. The syringe still attached. The evidence of her training, her field experience, her years of military medicine, all of it visible now. All of it exposed. She'd done the calculus in 90 seconds and chosen the colonel's life over her mission. Chosen one man's oxygen saturation over 8 months of operational security. Chosen what was right over what was ordered. The colonel's eyes found hers. There was recognition there. Not surprise. Recognition. Like he'd suspected something all along and now understood what he was looking at. The way she'd moved. The precision. The absence of panic. These weren't the hallmarks of a civilian nurse. These were the hallmarks of someone trained in field medicine. Someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Someone who'd done it before, under conditions that made a Tuesday night shift in a hospital look like a training exercise. His lips moved. His voice was weak but clear. Viper 6. That's all he said. 2 words. A call sign. A recognition. An acknowledgement that he knew exactly who she was. Katie's world fractured into 2 timelines, the one where her cover remained intact and the investigation into the medical supply diversion continued, and the one that had just happened, where she'd chosen between her mission and one man's life. The timeline where she'd saved him was the one she was living in now, and there was no path back from here. The timeline branched and the other one faded away. Dr. Mercer was still on his phone, his voice carrying through the ICU. I'm also calling the state licensing board. I'm contacting her nursing school. I want every credential verified. Something about her background doesn't add up, and now I know why. His smile was visible even through the phone call, the smile of someone who'd finally won. Get me the chief of staff. Get me security. And get me documentation of everything this nurse has done during her employment here. I want it all. Katie removed the needle and disposed of it. She documented what she'd done on the colonel's chart with the precision of someone who wasn't going to hide what had happened. Needle decompression. Time of procedure. Release of air from pleural space. Patient response. Vitals stabilized. Every detail recorded because there was no point in pretending anymore. The mask had slipped. The identity was exposed. The operation was compromised. The colonel's breathing steadied further. His eyes closed, not in unconsciousness but in relief. He was breathing on his own. He was alive. The tension pneumothorax was resolved. His heart was beating in a regular pattern. The trauma surgeon would come and place a proper chest tube, but the immediate threat to his life had passed. Katie stood next to his bed and looked at the faded unit patch visible inside the collar of his hospital gown, the one she'd seen on her first day in this room, the one that had told her everything about who this man was and why she was really here. And she understood, in that moment, that she'd made the right choice. Not the right choice for her career. Not the right choice for her mission. But the right choice. The one that her husband would have made. The one that the Air Force had trained her to make. Dr. Mercer was watching from the doorway, his phone still pressed to his ear, his expression triumphant. He didn't understand what he was looking at. He thought he'd found a criminal. He thought he'd found someone breaking the rules. He thought he'd finally gotten the victory he'd been pursuing for 8 months. He had no idea that the colonel was breathing because a captain in the United States Air Force had just sacrificed her cover to save his life. He had no idea what was about to walk through those hospital doors. By sunrise, Dr. Mercer's phone had become a weapon. He sat in his home office, leather desk, mahogany shelves lined with medical journals he'd never opened, the kind of room designed to broadcast authority, and started making calls. The board members owed him 20 years of charity galas, of donations with his name on brass plaques, of recommendations that opened doors for their children's medical school applications. He'd kept careful records. Now he cashed in. "There's a serious credentialing issue at the hospital," he told the board chairman, voice smooth as oil. "A nurse claiming qualification she doesn't possess. Patient safety is at risk." He didn't mention the colonel. He didn't mention the code. He mentioned only scope violations, documentation failures, the danger of untrained personnel making medical decisions. The board chairman listened. The board chairman agreed to convene an emergency session. Dr. Mercer hung up and immediately dialed the second number. Seattle Community College School of Nursing. He had a contact there, the Dean of Student Affairs, a woman whose nephew he'd written a recommendation letter for 5 years prior. Before she could finish saying hello, he was asking questions in the tone of someone conducting an investigation. "I need to verify the credentials of a former student. Katie Morrison. Graduated 2019. I'm concerned the application materials may have been falsified." He left pauses for her to fill with uncertainty. "I have documentation suggesting she may have misrepresented her background. Can you help me confirm?" The dean said she would look into it. By the time the sun cleared the horizon over San Antonio, Dr. Mercer had already contacted the state licensing board's investigator, a man he'd met at a medical conference in Austin who'd been impressed by his presence, his confidence, his way of commanding a room. "I need to report a potential credential fraud," he said. "And I'm concerned about patient safety during the investigation. This person may pose a risk." He didn't say she'd saved a life. He said she'd acted outside her scope. He said she'd endangered a patient. He said it with such certainty that the investigator wrote down his report without question. The calls took 90 minutes. The damage would take months to undo. Katie didn't know any of this yet. She was being escorted from the hospital by 5:38 a.m., dawn wasn't even fully broken, by a security guard who looked deeply uncomfortable with his own job. The HR director, avoiding eye contact, had already filled a cardboard box with her personal effects. The standard termination packet, severance information, benefits continuation forms, a notice that her nursing privileges at Seattle General were immediately revoked pending investigation. She carried the box to her car in the pre-dawn gray. It weighed almost nothing. Her hands didn't shake. Her face didn't change. But her breath came shallow as she drove toward the bus stop near her apartment, because she understood what had happened. The hospital had chosen him. 12 doctors had refused to help a dying man, and now the one person who hadn't refused was being erased from the system like she'd never existed at all. The rain started as she parked 3 blocks away. Not a gentle rain, a downpour that hammered the pavement with the sound of 1,000 fingers drumming on metal. She stood under the bus shelter with the cardboard box, looking at its contents. A cracked coffee mug from a tactical training exercise in 2019, the kind of thing that should have been thrown away years ago but somehow survived every deployment, every move, every transition. A dying succulent that her son had given her for her birthday, its leaves pale and brittle despite her attempts to save it. A photograph of her husband in his Air Force dress blues, taken 17 years earlier, his smile carrying the weight of a man who knew exactly what he was signing up for. 3 items. That was everything Seattle General had left her. The rain soaked through her cardboard box. The photograph began to warp. Katie watched it happen with the kind of stillness that comes from having survived worse, because she had survived worse, had held it together in conditions that would have shattered people who'd never worn the uniform, who'd never heard the medevac helicopters, who'd never felt the weight of another person's life depending entirely on their decision to stay or walk away. The bus came. She rode it to her apartment in silence, the box disintegrating in her lap, the rain continuing its assault against the windows like applause that would never stop. She had no way of knowing that her 16-year-old son, Tyler, was about to do something that would change everything. The next morning, Tyler Morrison burst through the hospital lobby doors at 9:14 a.m. wearing his school uniform, a dress slacks, button-down shirt, the kind of clothes he wore only when something mattered. In his trembling hands, he carried a shadow box. Inside, medals caught the fluorescent light, ribbons in blue and silver, a bronze star gleaming with terrible significance, and below them, the kind of decorations that make people in waiting rooms stop pretending to read their phones and actually look up. "Mom," he shouted, his voice cracking with the particular fury of a teenager who'd just learned his mother had been erased. "They need to see these. You can't let them do this to you." The board was convening in the atrium at that exact moment, an emergency session, Dr. Mercer had told them, to address a critical patient safety issue. The board chairman was already seated at the conference table, already reviewing the documentation Dr. Mercer had compiled, already leaning toward termination without even calling Katie for an explanation. The colonel had woken an hour earlier. Breathing on his own now. Still in the ICU, still bandaged and bruised, but the ventilator had been removed at 6:51 a.m. His eyes had opened at 7:15. His first words had been slurred, the medication still heavy in his system, but they'd been coherent. "Where is she?" 30 minutes later, when the board chairman called the meeting to order, the colonel's voice came through the overhead speakers like a ghost finding its voice. He'd pushed the call button. He'd told the nurse what to do. She'd wheeled him to the edge of the ICU where a speaker system could broadcast his words. "Viper 6, he whispered, loud enough for the atrium to hear. The code name. Katie's code name. The name only her unit knew. The room went so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights hum. A Marine hospital administrator, the facility's chief medical administrator, a woman with 30 years of service and a silver star of her own, stood up and pulled out a laminated citation. Her hands moved with the precision of someone handling something sacred. She began to read. "Captain Katie Morrison, United States Air Force, Silver Star for Valor under fire." She paused, letting the room absorb each word. "Combat Action Medal for Extraordinary Heroism in Tikrit. Recipient of 2 Purple Hearts. Navy Commendation Medal with Combat V." The citation states she performed life-saving medical interventions under active enemy fire, providing care to 14 personnel, sustaining injuries that would have medically discharged her from service had she reported them through proper channels. Dr. Mercer's face had gone the color of institutional tile. And then the doors opened. A 2-star general walked in, moved like someone whose presence restructured the air around him. Followed by 3 junior officers. Followed by a woman in a dark suit carrying a leather briefcase. The general approached the shadow box in Tyler's hands. He saluted the medals inside it, the kind of salute that comes from recognizing truth in its most condensed form. "Captain Morrison has been operating under deep cover for 8 months investigating this facility," the general said, his voice steady as ballast. "Her mission remains classified. Her actions last night were in defense of an asset whose operational security is critical to ongoing military operations in theater. The woman in the suit stepped forward. The Pentagon liaison. The reason the FBI agents had already been called. Her code name was Nightingale 7, Dr. Mercer, she said quietly. And you just attempted to destroy a decorated officer conducting a classified operation. You also attempted to interfere with that operation by preventing her from providing medical care. That's federal obstruction. The hospital IT director, a man named Chen, 22 years naval service, retirement in 2 years, which was why he could afford to be honest, stood up from where he'd been sitting in the back row. He held up a tablet. Funny thing about hospital security footage, he said. His voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen real consequences. About an hour after the incident last night, someone with Dr. Mercer's digital credentials attempted to access and delete security recordings from the oncology wing. Specifically footage showing 12 attending physicians refusing to treat a coding patient. He turned the tablet toward the board. Every frame was there. Every refusal. Every moment of Dr. Mercer standing at the nurse's station while Katie fought alone. I saved every frame before reporting the deletion attempt to federal authorities. Since this facility is now part of an active military investigation, the deletion attempt is conspiracy to obstruct. Dr. Mercer's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. This is a misunderstanding, he said. His voice had climbed half an octave. I'm a respected physician. 20 years of practice. I have concerns about scope of practice, about patient safety. That's my job. That's why I reported. You reported her after she saved a life that you and 11 others abandoned, the general said. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. You made calls to board members. You contacted her nursing school. You filed complaints with the state. All of that is documented. All of it is being reviewed as potential retaliation for her refusal to allow a patient to die. 2 FBI agents in dark suits emerged from the corridor where they'd apparently been waiting for exactly this moment. Federal timing. Federal precision. Dr. Mercer, one of them said, we need to ask you some questions about Schedule 2 medication signed out under your DEA number. The quantities don't match patient records. Dr. Mercer wasn't just trying to destroy Katie anymore. He was being investigated for the very thing Katie's undercover assignment was designed to find. The board chairman read from a tablet. Dr. Mercer, your medical privileges at Seattle General are immediately revoked, effective now. You're suspended from practice pending investigation. You're also being named in a federal obstruction investigation. The colonel, still pale, still recovering, still dying on his feet but alive because Katie had stayed, managed to raise his voice loud enough for the entire atrium to hear him. 12 doctors walked past me while I was dying, he said. She's the only one who stayed. And the room erupted. Nurses who'd witnessed 8 months of Dr. Mercer's campaign began speaking, the rumors he'd spread, the reputation he'd systematically destroyed, the way he'd turned her name into something shameful. One resident admitted he'd been specifically told Katie was mentally unstable and to avoid her. Another confessed he believed her credentials were falsified because Dr. Mercer had been so certain, so authoritative, so completely convincing. The hospital IT director revealed something else. Dr. Mercer's name appeared on supply requisitions that didn't match patient records. He wasn't a bystander to the diversion ring Katie had been sent to investigate. He was a participant. He was the inside person. He was being paid. Dr. Mercer tried to leave. The FBI agents blocked his path with the kind of professional certainty that made it clear this moment had been choreographed hours ago, planned, prepared, and executed with precision. 6 months later, Katie stood in her Air Force dress uniform for the first time in 3 years. Her captain's bars caught the gymnasium lights at Canyon Ridge High School like small promises. The colonel sat beside her in a wheelchair, recovering inch by inch, his strength returning slowly but visibly. The faded unit patch from his jacket lining, the MacGuffin object, the thing that had started everything, the physical proof of his command over her deployed son, was now framed on the wall behind the stage, alongside the school's military service honors. Tyler Morrison walked across that stage at 17 years old to receive his appointment to the Air Force Academy, the same institution where his father had graduated 20 years earlier. The same path that led forward instead of backward. Katie saluted her son as the principal read his accomplishments. The salute was formal, military, public, the first time she'd allowed herself to be seen fully, completely, without the mask of a civilian nurse and the operational discipline that came with it. 3 of the 12 doctors who'd refused the colonel that night watched from the back row, suspended pending review, their faces carrying the permanent weight of a choice they would never escape or forget. Dr. Mercer was not present. He was teaching CPR fundamentals at a community college in Austin for $18 an hour, his medical license revoked, his federal trial pending on charges of obstruction and controlled substance diversion. His career hadn't ended in disgrace, disgrace required an audience, and he had none anymore. It had ended in erasure. The hospital IT director, wearing his Navy veteran cap, gave Katie a thumbs up from the front row. The general who'd come in that morning was there, uniform pressed, posture perfect, watching Tyler accept his appointment with the kind of satisfaction that comes from seeing the system work correctly for once. After the ceremony, the colonel gripped Katie's hand. His grip had strength returning to it, returning day by day, the kind of strength that comes from having something worth recovering for. "Your boy's going to make a hell of an officer," he whispered. Katie thought about the needle decompression, the hiss of released pressure, the moment she'd had to choose between mission and life. She'd chosen life. She'd chosen to stay. She'd chosen the one thing that mattered more than operational security. "He already knows the most important lesson," she replied, watching Tyler accept congratulations from classmates and teachers, the shadow box of her medals visible in his hands now, no longer hidden, no longer secret. The ones who have seen the worst often give the most. The gymnasium emptied slowly around them. Katie stood in uniform between her son and the man she'd saved, the weight of 8 months of silence finally lifted, her real identity no longer classified but vindicated, her choice validated by the simple fact that everyone in the building had witnessed it, acknowledged it, saluted it. Subscribe to see more stories of people who were underestimated and became unstoppable. Like this video if you believe in speaking up against injustice. Comment below, would you have made the same choice Katie did? And tell us which moment hit you hardest, when the colonel said her code name, or when her son walked across that stage.